A second member of the Cuban Five spy ring was released today from a U.S. prison after spending more than 15 years behind bars. 50-year-old Fernando Gonzalez, known to the U.S. authorities by his alias Ruben Campa, completed his sentence today in Safford, Arizona. According to U.S. Attorney's Office, Gonzalez has been turned over to immigration officials for deportation to Cuba. The 5 men who make up the Cuban Five were convicted in 2001 in Miami for spying. The first of the Cuban Five to be released was Fernando Gonzalez. He finished his prison sentence in 2011, but spent more than a year on probation in the U.S. until a judge allowed him to return to Cuba. So to discuss this a little bit more, I want to bring in RT's Nicholas O'Donovan, who's been following this story from our Miami bureau. So, Nicholas, take us back to 2001 when the Cuban Five were first convicted. What exactly were they charged with in detail?
Hello, Ameera. How are you doing? Well, actually, that trial began in November of 2000. It was a very long and complex process, as you can imagine, that went on for 7 months. It all happened here in Miami, and from the very beginning, the legal teams defending the Cuban Five fought for a change of venue because, as we all know, South Florida is a stronghold for the Cuban exile. That didn't happen, and the jury found them guilty of all 26 counts, including conspiracy to commit espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, and acting as agents of a foreign government here in the United States. And besides the trial lasting several months, the verdict, well, surprise, was just announced in a few minutes. Then, in December 2001, all 5 members of the group received different sentences. Fernando and René Gonzalez, the 2 that are already out, got 19 and 15 years, but Antonio Guerrero and Ramon Labañino got life in prison, and Gerardo Hernandez received 2 life sentences to be served consecutively.
And what has the Cuban government's response been over the years? This has gone on for, so long. What's their response been to this incarceration?
It's been going on since 1998, and basically the Cuban government has always had a different position, a very different point of view. And what they've always said is that the team was an anti-terrorist unit whose mission was to avoid any violent action coming from Miami-based groups against the Castro regime. So their version is very different, that the group was never targeting the US military, but Miami Cuban exile groups. No? In addition, we have recently heard from the Cuban officials that Washington simply lacks the will to end this case once and for all, and they directly accuse the US officials of bribing journalists to inflate the story and create a negative view of the Cuban Five in the public eye here in the US. So a very strong position from La Habana, and also a very different one from the one we hear from Washington.
And Nicholas, it's not only the Cuban government, but also the Cuban people, both abroad and in the U.S., in Miami, where you are. They've long lobbied for their release. We're now seeing the second to be released, Fernando Gonzalez. But do you think it's because of those efforts that he's finally being released?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. It's not only the Cuban officials, but the Cuban people around the world that are lobbying for their release. And we've also heard Amnesty International criticising the US for unnecessarily punitive actions towards some of the Cuban Five for not granting visas to their relatives so that they could come and visit them here in the US. The United Nations Commission of Human Rights stated also that the trial did not take place in the climate of objectivity and impartiality that is required in order to confirm the standards of a fair trial. So there has been a lot of pressure, but honestly, both René and Fernando Gonzalez have completed their sentences, and they just got the standard reduction for good conduct. So I don't think in these 2 cases, the effort was heard, no? But activists, they insist that they're going to keep on fighting for those 3 members of the group that are still in prison. We have seen some reductions in 2 of those cases, so some efforts have definitely been heard in Washington, yes.
And Nicholas, is there any sentiment in the reaction to all of this that this could be a step toward better U.S.-Cuban relations?
Well, better US-Cuban relations, that is a very, very deep and complex problem. No, it's not only, the many crossed interests between these 2 countries, but because there is such a large and strong Cuban community living here in the US, and specifically here in Miami or South Florida, that many times, one gets the sensation that this can just get in the way of any possible improvement. But as I say, it is such a deep problem, and we do try to tend and find, a turning point that would trigger a change. But I don't really think the relations will change due to a single issue. It's more a matter of will and of compromise.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we have time for. RT's Nicholas O'Donovan from our Miami studio. Thank you.